just forgive me that I went ahead and jumped ahead. That's the reading for Sunday. For tomorrow, for Christmas Eve. And this is kind of our Christmas Eve in a way, since we're all going to be over at St. Thomas, and it's going to be a pageant and mayhem and all of that stuff, which pageants normally are. Well, okay, just the pageants that I've seen, generally out of control. I love it. I had no problem with it. But thought we would just spend some time focusing on the Christmas story and kind of what happened that night from maybe an Advent perspective, because Advent is about questioning and preparing. So at first I started thinking how curious the royal throne room was. No tapestries that covered the windows, no velvet garments on the people attending, and instead of a golden scepter, the king holds a crudely carved piece of wood. Curious also the sounds in the court: cows munching, hooves crunching, a mother humming, and a babe nursing. It could have begun anywhere, this story of our king, but curiously enough, it began in a feeding trough. The noise and the bustle began earlier than usual in the village that day. As night gave way to dawn, people were already on the streets. Vendors positioning themselves on the corners of the most heavily traveled avenues. Store owners were unlocking the doors to their shops. Children were awakened by the exciting barking of the street dogs and the complaints of the donkeys pulling their carts. The owner of the inn had awakened earlier than most in the town. After all, the inn was full, all the beds taken. Every available mat or blanket had been put to use. Soon all the customers would be stirring and there would be a lot of work to do. One's imagination is kindled thinking about the conversation maybe of the innkeeper and his family at the breakfast table that morning. Did anybody mention the arrival of the young couple the night before? Did anyone comment on the pregnancy of the girl on the donkey? Maybe somebody raised the subject, but at best it was raised, not discussed. There's nothing that novel about them. They were possibly one of several families turned away that night. Besides, who had time to talk about them when there was so much excitement in the air? Caesar Augustus did the economy of Bethlehem a huge favor when he decreed that a census should be taken. Who could remember when such commerce had hit the village? No, it's doubtful that anyone mentioned the couple's arrival or wondered about the condition of the girl. They were too busy. The day was upon them. The day's bread had to be made. The morning chores had to be done. There was too much to do to imagine that the impossible had occurred, that God had entered the world as a baby. Yet, were someone chance upon the sheep stable on the outskirts of Bethlehem that morning, what a peculiar scene they would behold. It's a stable, and it stinks like all stables do. The stench of urine and dung and sheep probably reeks pungently in the air. The ground is hard. I'm sure the hay was scarce. Cobwebs cling to the ceiling, and probably a mouse runs across the dirt floor. A more lowly place of birth could not exist. Off to one side sits a group of shepherds, silently sitting there on the floor, perhaps perplexed, maybe in awe, no doubt in amazement, because they were probably remembering what that night must have looked like. I don't know about you, but imagine being out there amongst just you and the stars when all of a sudden it explodes into this symphony of light and sound. Man, imagine what would happen if your night was interrupted by a symphony of angels. Okay. But it's interesting. And the observation that I'd like to make tonight as one thing to take home is that God goes to those who have time to hear it. So on that night, that cloudless night, he went to simple shepherds. Now near the young mother sits a weary father. If anybody's dozing, he is. He can't remember the last time he sat down. And now that the excitement has subsided a bit, now that Mary and baby are comfortable, he leans against the wall of the stable and feels his eyes grow heavy. He still hasn't figured it all out. The mystery of the event puzzles him. He doesn't have the energy to wrestle with the questions. What's important is that the baby is fine and that Mary is safe. As sleep comes, he remembers the name the angel told him to use. Jesus. We'll call him Jesus. Mary, however, is wide awake. Head maybe resting against Joseph's saddle, her pain probably eclipsed by wonder as she looks into the face of the baby, her son, and her Lord. At this point in history, the human being who best understands God who God is and what God is doing is a teenage girl in a stable. And she can't take her eyes off of him. Somehow Mary knows she's holding God. So this is he. She remembers the word of the angel. His kingdom will never end. Well, right now he looks anything but a king. His face is prunish and red. His cry, though strong and healthy, is still the helpless and piercing cry of a baby. And he is absolutely dependent upon Mary for his well-being. Majesty in the midst of the mundane. Holiness in the middle of sheep, manure, and sweat. Divinity entering the world on the floor of a stable through the womb of a teenager in the presence of a carpenter. It's amazing. What's it like to hold the baby? The child that had overseen the creation of the universe. The rags that he's now wearing were replaced because they used to be the rags and the robes of eternity. His golden throne room had been abandoned in favor of a dirty sheep pen, and worshiping angels had been replaced with kind but very confused shepherds. And meanwhile, the city hums. The merchants are unaware that God has visited their planet. The innkeeper would never believe that he had just sent God out into the cold. And the people would scoff at anyone who had told them the Messiah lay in the arms of a teenager on the outskirts of their village. They were all too busy to consider the possibility. Now, those who missed His Majesty's arrival that night didn't miss it because of evil acts or malice. They missed it because they just weren't looking. Not much has changed in 2,000 years. People go about their business and miss the moments that define who we are. We've got to be looking for these moments because I still believe that God shows up in the magic. It was one moment, one after very, very remarkable moments, but as moments go, it's no different. It was still whatever time it took, 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. If you could somehow pick that one moment off the timeline and examine it, it would look just like the last ones that have passed. It came and it went, preceded and succeeded by others just like it. One of countless moments that have marked time since eternity became measurable, but in reality that particular moment was like none other. For through that segment of time, a spectacular thing occurred. God became a man. While the creatures of earth walked unaware, divinity arrived. Heaven opened herself and placed her most precious one in a human womb. The omnipotent in one instant made himself breakable. He who had been spirit became pierceable. He who was larger than the universe became an embryo. And he who stains the world with a word chose to be dependent upon the nourishment from a young girl. God is a fetus. Holiness sleeping in a womb. The creator of life being created. God was given elbows, eyebrows, 2 kidneys, a spleen, stretching against the walls and floated in amniotic fluid of his mother. Emmanuel. I'm going somewhere. God is with us. I see the puzzled looks. God came near. And he came, this is important, not as a flash of light or an unapproachable conqueror, but as someone whose first cries were heard by a peasant girl and a sleepy carpenter. The hands that first held him were unmanicured, calloused, and dirty. No silk, no ivory, no hoopla. Were it not for the shepherds, there wouldn't have been any kind of reception. Were it not for a group of stargazers, there wouldn't have been any gifts. He grew up just like you and me. Someone had to change his diaper. The universe watched with wonder as the Almighty learned to walk. Children played in the streets with him. And the synagogue leader in Nazareth, who was listening to his sermons, I wonder if they would have been any different. Jesus might have had pimples. He might have been tone deaf. Maybe a girl down the street had a crush on him. Could have been that his knees were bony like mine. One thing's for sure, he was, while completely divine, completely human. For 33 years, he would feel everything that you and I ever feel. Weak, weary, maybe afraid of failure at times. He got colds. He burped. Maybe he had body odor. His feelings got hurt for sure. His feet got tired, and I'm sure his head ached at times with how rough his disciples were. Now, to think of Jesus in such a light, well, it seems almost irreverent, doesn't it? It's not something we like to do. It's uncomfortable. It's much easier to keep the humanity out of the incarnation. Clean the manure from around the manger and wipe the sweat out of his eye. I'd imagine that tomorrow's manger scene will look nothing like the original. We like to pretend he never snored or blew his nose or hit his thumb with a hammer. He's easier to stomach that way. There's something about keeping him divine that keeps him distant, packaged and familiar and predictable, but don't do it. For heaven's sake, don't do it. Let him be as human as he intended to be. Let him into the mire and muck of our world, because only if we let him in can he pull us out. Listen to him. Love your neighbor was spoken by a man whose neighbors tried to kill him. The challenge to leave family for the gospel was issued by one who kissed his mother one day goodbye and probably never spoke to her again. Pray for those who persecute you came from the lips that would soon be begging God to forgive his murderers. And I am with you always are the words of a God who in one instant did the impossible to make it all possible for you and me. And it all happened in a moment. In one moment, a most remarkable moment, the Word became flesh. There's going to be another moment. There's going to be another instantaneous transformation. In becoming man, God made it possible for man to see God. When Jesus went home, he left the back door open. And as a result, we will all be changed in a moment. Now, the first moment of transformation, it went unnoticed by the world. But you can bet the house that the second one won't. The next time you see you use the phrase just a moment, remember that that's all the time that it took for God to change this world when Jesus came to us the first time. And that's all it's going to take when he comes again. Emmanuel, God is with us to redeem us. And we should be looking for those moments every moment of every day. Because you never know what God would do with your life or with your words for somebody else. What we do in this life echoes in eternity. And so this Christmas, this Advent, as we come and we sing joy to the world, we do it knowing we're redeemed. But man, it's easy to miss. Let's not miss it. Amen.